Good morning, Megan.
Good morning.
I love the way Tony's kitchen looks.
Yeah.
Everybody always comments on my picture. I think I'm gonna start doing my TikTok videos from here.
Yeah.
Very classy.
Just invite me over and cook. That's all.
Hey, I'm thinking about opening up St. Junia West Side in another couple of weeks.
Let's rock on. Yeah. We were
just sorry.
Go ahead, Megan.
Oh.
I was like, just don't do one of those videos with the giant uncooked amounts of beef.
Baby, I love that girl. Like she had one the other day where somebody made like a bacon burger. It was terrible. Like, and I don't know why these people think these are good cooking tips. Like none of it looks cooked. It's terrible.
It has to be a joke. I don't know.
I don't know what you guys are referencing because I'm not on TikTok very much, so I have to go find it now.
I'm gonna have to send you some. Like it's this lady who critiques cooking videos, and they're always just god awful. Like, did you think this was gonna go together? And she's always screaming at the end, "You all right?"
I love it. Good morning, Paula. Hey, Robert.
Good morning.
Hey, look at Paula.
Welcome back.
It's good to be back. I have enjoyed listening and not participating, which, by the way, I gladly participate. But if you want Shelby to continue doing the Old Testament, I don't have a problem with that.
Oh, right on. Well,
the chat is disabled.
Huh?
The chat is disabled.
Okay, again. All right. Yeah, all right. Thank you. Let's see.
I should know how to do that, but I keep forgetting.
I have the same issue. Okay.
I'm still having an eye problem, so if I'm squinting at you, it has no connotations emotionally with what's going on.
I think I've enabled the chat on Zoom. So can we have someone test it out? There. Okay.
Yeah, I see everyone now.
Okay. Yeah. Good. Yay. Okay. So yeah, and I guess so we're live streaming. So if you're on Facebook or YouTube, and you would like to participate in our conversation today, feel free to type in the comments, or we'll also ask you to just click like or let us know that where you're watching from. That just gives us a way to count you today. Yeah, Paula. I mean, I kind of figure like I kind of like mixing it up. So I don't know if Shelby's going to be on today, but if
I know Kay said she probably would not be because she had a rough week.
Okay.
And I had to leave around like 10:30. We're getting a new dog, so we gotta go meet the lady with a
new dog.
Yeah.
Oh my.
Schnauzer.
Oh my. Well, okay. Well, let's go ahead and get started because Angela's not going to be on. She's going to listen today too. So let's Tony, if you don't mind doing the liturgy. Rob, we'll keep the old roles if that's cool.
Absolutely.
And if y'all can help monitor Facebook, would someone monitor Facebook and someone monitor YouTube for comments and prayer requests?
I can watch Facebook.
Okay.
I was gonna say I'll do the internal chat until I leave.
Okay. All right. That sounds good.
And one thing to be aware of on Facebook, the comments weren't showing up right last week. I think we need to make sure that you got it displaying like all comments or newest or whatever.
Yeah, I'm so frustrated with Facebook anyway. I wouldn't use it if I didn't have to, but okay. So let me go ahead and get the liturgy up on the screen. All right. And ready to go when you are.
Hi, good morning. On this day in 1977, the Voyager 1 space probe took the first photograph of the moon and Earth together. Today is also the feast of St. Joseph of Cupertino. He was considered slow by his family and village. After failing at being a shoemaker, he was rejected as a supplicant first by the Franciscan monks and then by the Capuchins. He resolved to be a servant of the Franciscans, but quickly proved his devotion and ability. When he was being examined for admission as a deacon, he performed poorly until his examiner said, "Just tell me what you do know." And then he amazed his listeners with his answers. It was said that when he prayed, he levitated. And so his patron saint, so he is the patron saint of pilots as well as people with mental disabilities. He is a reminder that people who need accommodations for disabilities are a channel of grace for everyone around them. Today, in 1905, George MacDonald died. MacDonald was a Scottish minister, author, and poet who greatly influenced C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien. I needed that. I needed that. There's so many reasons this morning. Greetings. Today we draw a circle not of exclusion, but of inclusion.
Our God has revealed that God's nature is love.
And the glory of God is a human being fully alive.
We come to be students of love and of life.
To learn and to teach, to share the wisdom of our ancestors.
Draw near and let us break together the bread of life.
Ezekiel 19, 1-3, and 10-14. What a lioness was your mother among lions. Among young lions, she lay raising her cubs. She raised up one of her cubs who became a young lion, who learned to catch prey, who devoured the woman born. Your mother was like a vine in a vineyard planted by the waters, fruitful and full of branches from abundant water. She had mighty branches for a ruler's scepter. She grew tall, her height among the clouds, and was seen because of her height and because of her many branches. Then she was uprooted in rage. She was thrown to the ground. The east wind withered her fruit. They were stripped off. Her strongest stem was withered and then consumed by fire. Now she is planted in the wilderness, in a dry and thirsty land. Now fire has gone out of her staff and has devoured her branches, her fruit. Now there is no mighty branch within her, no scepter for ruling.
2 Samuel 1:17-27. David keened this lamentation over Saul and over Jonathan his son. Then he taught the bow song to the women and men of Judah. It is written in the book of Jashar. He said, "The splendor of Israel upon heights lay slain. How the mighty have fallen. Tell it not in Gath, proclaim it not in the streets of Ashkelon, lest the daughters of the Philistines rejoice, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised exult. Hills of Gilboa, let there be neither dew nor rain upon you, nor offering laden fields. For there the shield of the mighty was abhorred, the shield of Saul anointed with oil no more, for the blood of the slain, for the fat of the mighty. The bow of Jonathan did not turn back, and neither did the sword of Saul return empty. Saul and Jonathan, beloved and delightful in life and death, they were not parted. They were swifter than eagles. They were stronger than lions. Daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you with scarlet in luxury, who overlaid your garments with adornments of gold. How the mighty have fallen in the midst of battle. Jonathan, upon your heights lay slain. I grieve over you, my brother Jonathan. A great delight you were to me. Your love to me was wonderful, more than the love of women. How the mighty have fallen and the weapons of war destroyed."
Matthew 5, 1-9. Now, when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain and sat down. His disciples came to him. Then he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the majesty of the heavens. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." May God bless the hearing of this word.
Thanks be to God.
In The Princess and the Goblin, George MacDonald wrote, "We are all very anxious to be understood, and it is very hard not to be. But there is one thing much more necessary." What is that, grandmother? To understand other people. Yes, grandmother, I must be fair. For if I'm not fair to other people, I'm not worthy being understood myself, I see. In The Princess and the Curdy, he wrote, there is this difference between the growth of some human beings and that of others. In the one case, it is a continuous dying. In the other, it is a continuous resurrection.
So we'll go into a time of prayer. I'll get us started. And if those of you who are listening on Facebook or YouTube or on Zoom, if you want to lift up a prayer request, you can do so in the chat or the comments. And then we'll conclude with the Lord's Prayer. Let's pray together. God, you love us and treasure us. You breathe your own breath into us. You made us in your image. You tell us that not even a sparrow can fall to the ground without you noticing. And we know that you are concerned for our well-being, that you would see us thrive and live and love and experience all the goodness that you long to pour out upon the world. We recognize, though, that there are many obstacles for some of us to enjoy this goodness, whether it's poverty or conflict, war that's foisted upon us by other people, trauma, illness. The list is very long. God, we ask your Holy Spirit to remove those obstacles, that all people could enjoy the abundance of your world and the joy of living. Help us, God, to reclaim this as our birthright, that we are made in love, for love, and by love, and that your Spirit surrounds us and lifts us up and is drawing the world towards healing and justice. So we lift up to you people and situations who are close to our hearts, and we name them before you now. And I invite those of you listening to share.
For Teresa's mom,
Lord, hear our prayer.
The people of Pakistan.
Lord, hear our prayer.
in gratitude for cooler weather,
Lord, hear our prayer.
Teresa's grandfather and grandmother for peace and ease of suffering,
Lord, hear our prayer.
Lauren Sparks.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For Brandon,
Lord, hear our prayer.
for Catherine Cooper's family,
Lord, hear our prayer.
for Maya,
Lord, hear our prayer.
Vicky McCartney.
Lord, hear our prayer.
for David Barnhart's new grandson, Phoenix,
Lord, hear our prayer.
For Cindy Patsios.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For teachers facing obstacles in teaching their students,
Lord, hear our prayer.
for immigrants,
transgender,
Lord, hear our prayer.
for transgender children and adults,
Lord, hear our prayer.
gracious God, we give you thanks for all the blessings you pour out upon us. We lift all these names to you, knowing that your grace knows no bounds. So for places where there's healing, we ask you to bring healing. And for places where there's joy, we celebrate with you and acknowledge that all joy comes from you. And we share the prayer that Jesus taught us. Holy One, our Mother and Father, let your name be revered. Let your reign come. Let your will be done on earth as it is in the heavens. Give us today the bread we need for today, and forgive our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Save us from the time of trial and deliver us from evil. For yours is the sovereignty, the power, and the glory, now and forever. Amen. So the lectionary that Will de Gaffney has put together today gives us a pair of laments. And I'm going to be honest, when I first turned to lament, I was like, man, I don't want to do lament. And I recognize, though, that's the natural response. Like when we encounter negative emotions, when we encounter psalms that are about depressing things and hopelessness and frustration and grief, our natural response is to turn away. In fact, one of the things I think I took away most from hospital chaplaincy training was when they were talking about expressions of grief in the hospital, like someone hears that someone has died or that there's an outcome they didn't want. The sort of the dramatic expressions of grief that cause people around to get uncomfortable, like someone wails and falls on the floor and collapses. And oftentimes the reaction of the people around is to hush that person up, put them in a private room, get them out of the way, right? And the object of their soothing is not the person who's experiencing the grief, it's the bystanders. It's the people around, right? And so what we were reminded to do is, look, those bystanders can take care of themselves. In fact, this may be a teaching moment that grief is natural, and that sometimes, if you're having some discomfort, maybe you just need to tolerate that discomfort a bit because this person's world just ended, right? So I think our kind of public response to grief, it's natural to be uncomfortable and to want to turn away. But sometimes, look, life happens, discomfort's present, and one of the things we can do as a community is learn how to respond to proper lament. I will be honest. You've heard me say this before. Sometimes I struggle leading progressive Christians, whether it's this church or whether it's out in the world, whether it's having coffee, that oftentimes progressive Christians, especially in this season of history, when there's such awful crap everywhere, that it can very quickly turn into a gripe session about how things are just really, really awful. And I struggle between, sometimes wanting to say, how can we turn this toward a positive note, or recognizing that there's a lot to lament. There's a lot to be frustrated and sad and angry about. But I think what lament gives us is this picture of a human being going through grief in a very holy way. One of the things I think is so powerful about lament is that it often starts, or it's somewhere in the lament, there's an acknowledgement of all the good that has been lost or that we're losing. You hear it in David's words, how the mighty have fallen. Saul and Jonathan were like eagles. They were mighty warriors. They were wonderful people. David talks about his love for Jonathan, and whether there's some homoerotic stuff in there often gets, it doesn't matter. Like the point is, he loved Jonathan deeply. Jonathan was one of the key figures in his life, regardless of what their relationship was, right? And he grieves that loss. Ezekiel's doing the same thing for Israel. He's saying Israel was like a lion. Israel was like a tall tree, like a vine. And he enumerates all the wonderful qualities, this country that he loved, this place and this people that he was so passionate about. And he grieves the loss of it. But he does it first by naming all the positive things. I think it's important in the midst of grief, even when things are lousy, to look at the good stuff, even if it's good stuff that you're losing, to name what that is, so that you savor it, so that you appreciate it. Read an article this week about climate grief, and it talked about all the different nuanced emotions in what we're losing. It's right to lament the loss of species, to talk about the bright colors on the species that disappear from the planet, the insects and the relationships they had with the flowers, to name those things. Not just to gesture at it and say, oh, it's all awful and everything's bad, but part of what makes us grieve is that the love and the memory we have is so strong, right? These are beautiful things that we're losing. The pastor I was talking to at coffee this past week talked about his son going to Glacier National Park because he wanted to see the glaciers before they're gone. There used to be 300 and now there's 20. But in the process of doing that, can you hear? Like, that's a holy moment. That lament is important. So, and I don't think lament is just wallowing in self-pity. You're not just saying, woe is me. You're naming the good things that are being lost or that are under threat. And sometimes lament, I think, is important for communities because then it's part of the healing process and it moves us toward action. Every year, Faith in Action Alabama does a lament about homicides in Birmingham. And they list the names of all the people killed over the year on banners. And I remember one particular march after we marched through the city carrying the banners of the names of people who've been killed in it. We arrived at First United Methodist Church. We gathered in the congregation. The banners were collected at the front, and then they read out the names of the people who had been killed. And they had members of the family come claim a banner, go up the stairs to the balcony, and then stand around the congregation. And there were some folks' names read out who didn't have families. And so volunteers would go up and pick up a banner and go up and stand in the balcony. And I volunteered. And I have to tell you, when I picked up the banner and read the name on it, I just felt chills, as though that person were with me as I walked up to the balcony. And that visual image of all those people standing around the church, the congregation, which was getting smaller and smaller as more people went up into the balcony. It felt like there was a question posed to the people in the congregation, which is, all these people, this cloud of witnesses around you are looking at you, asking you, so what are you going to do now? And that's an example of how lament, giving voice to a community's grief, moved everyone toward action, right? The idea is, lament isn't just wallowing in self-pity, it's naming the good that is under threat or the good that has gone so that we can do something about it. So when we hear these two laments, I think it's wonderful the way she paired it with the Beatitudes. So when Jesus is talking about the blesseds, some of the things that Jesus includes are, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. So he names, and throughout all the Beatitudes, people you don't normally consider being blessed. In fact, all the people he lists have a lot of reasons to lament. And he concludes that all of them are blessed. All of them inherit the kingdom of God. What she left off at the end is that's when Jesus turns to his disciples and says, and blessed are y'all when y'all are persecuted, when y'all are vilified, when you mourn. The whole idea is that as long as you're in solidarity with those who are lamenting, you are going to have your day. Like, comfort is coming, righteousness is coming. And as he lists all those things, he's not putting it off in the future. Actually, he's saying it's with you now. And I think that also points to something about lament, like giving voice to these things the healing is happening now, like the reward is happening now. But we have to name it. We can't turn away from it. We have to embrace all of it. So that's lament. As I said, it's not really what I wanted to talk about today, but I'm grateful that she that she pairs these scriptures and puts them together, because I think it calls out to me anyway in what I feel my emotional response needs to be. I want to share just one thing. I don't normally do this, but I want to share something that I saw on social media right before this service. And it was someone posted, here's a vulnerable post. How do you avoid developing a bitter resentment towards the people who are hijacking Christianity in their bigoted pursuit of power and shipwrecking the faith of many? And I feel that in my bones. And I'll tell you my response, and then I'll wrap up and invite your responses as well. The way I reply to this is, I feel this. Personally, I don't think we can fight bitter resentment. I think I can notice it and acknowledge it. And the more I practice seeing things as they are, the less bitter I feel. This is kind of what I'm trying to learn from my Buddhist siblings. In the same way, I think white evangelicals are responding from the theological and social trauma of barbarism across European Christianity. As Resma Menachem points out, they're letting their own historical trauma blow through them. Suffering begets suffering unless we can heal our own. And I think lament is a way that we begin to heal our trauma. We have to name what's being lost. We have to name what frightens us and hurts us and scares us so that we can begin to heal ourselves. And in doing that, we name the good things that are under threat, or the good things that have been lost. And I think that's what I'm receiving from the scripture today. I would love to hear your responses.
I'm going to jump right in because I got to go in a little bit.
Okay.
But I saw that, I really was reading that post that you posted right before we started this. Like you had posted like 15 minutes earlier. And I just stopped and wondered. I saw a post this morning where I think it was NPR had this thing where it said, like, in the next few years, less than 50% of people in the United States will identify as Christian. My response was, yay.
Yeah.
And I say yay because this is not, what we're doing is not Christianity. Like, it's this conservative white nationalist, like populist bullcrap, and they put a crucifix on the front of it and call it Christianity. None of this is what Christ calls us to do.
Yeah.
And so, like, you know, when I've had a lot of people who have had a lot of sadness in the last week or so. Like, one of my friends lost a grandchild in a car accident, and like, just the fact of being Black in this godforsaken country is just enough to lament every time you wake up in the morning. But, you know, you can handle grief one or two ways. You can sit there and wallow in it and have a pity party, which I'm not going to come, or you can fight. You know, those are our options at this point. And yes, and I also will say this, making sure that you have like someone you can talk to about these emotions, i.e. therapy, kind of helps. It helps putting things like this into perspective, because like, you can tell the people who don't have therapists because they're angry and they're mad about stuff that they've lost that they haven't lost. Like AK white conservatives. Like, what have you lost? What are you? Why are y'all mad that we have a fictional character played by a Black woman? Like, why are y'all so mad about that? I did this video. It's not church compliant, but you can go check it out on my TikTok. But literally, one of my friends posted this thing last night where this guy was like, what if they did an all-white version of The Wiz? And I'm like, The Wiz was the all-Black version of the all-white Wizard of Oz, idiot.
Yeah.
Like, this is what white people are doing right now. Like, literally, this is what y'all cousins are doing right now. Like, okay, so what? So what if they did an all-white version of The Wiz? Guess who don't care? We don't. We don't care. I'm not gonna get upset. I'm not gonna start trolling people because they are making white version of Black stuff for the last 200 years.
Sure.
Like, since movies started, like, this is nothing new. But then they wanted to lament a loss of their culture. Like, you are not a mermaid, man. You cannot breathe underwater. You don't have fins or legs. Like, that is not your culture. Like, you can't colonize everything. Like, literally colonizing ideas. And they get mad when you call it out. You lost absolutely nothing. Nothing.
Yeah.
When we are literally losing our rights as individuals, as women, as Black people, as immigrants. And the saddest thing I think about this is the fact that the people who are taking these things, who are diminishing people, do it under the cloak of Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
They do it under the cloak of Christianity, and it's just not right. And if hell exists, there's a special place in hell for people who lead people astray, doing stuff like that. And it's just across the board. So I lament the loss of my rose-colored glasses, thinking that some way, somehow this country might get better. But these blue ones on, I'm just gonna see and mind my Black business. I'm out.
Thank you for that. Yeah. So I mean, I hear what you're saying, and I think I would actually say I don't think I hear a lot of lament in terms of naming specific good things that have been lost from conservative Christians,
because they haven't lost anything. They have lost absolutely nothing.
Right. And the things that they would be naming would be things like separate drinking fountains. I mean, that's like so they're not going to name those things. Right. But I think
unpaid labor.
Yeah. I think it really is unhealed trauma. But yeah, I appreciate that. So Megan, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I think talking about the fact that there's a lack of lament in conservative culture. I mean, I think a lot of broken power structures would rather you didn't feel so loud, because loud feelings find other people with loud feelings, and then you kind of realize, oh, wait a minute, this sucks,
Yeah.
And you maybe turn around and share those feelings with people who would rather you just be quiet and enjoy the peace,
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah. The other thing I wanted to share, you were talking about in the loss of species throughout time. And I mean, I really wish that they would have, like at the end of the Oscars, they always have that, like, the people who died this year kind of thing. I mean, we should have one of those every year for all of the species that have died in the world. Rob and I actually, we went to was this in the Field Museum? No, this was in the Museum of Science and Industry at Chicago. And we saw this amazing photography exhibit by James Baylog. I'm going to put a link to, just so you can see some of it. He went around the Arctic and maybe the Antarctic too. I know he went to Greenland. He put out cameras where the glaciers are and like took time-lapse photography of like them dying, So, and I mean, he's captured some amazing like calving events, with giant chunks of ice coming off in the sea. And I mean, even just the comparison photography of like, not that many years. We're talking about, I can't remember what the shortest time span was, but, maybe 5 years. Like some of them have like vastly decreased. So, I mean, that's something we should also mourn. And I mean, this is sort of this kind of exhibit is, I don't know, it makes me think about like, photos of people who've died, Yeah.
No, thank you for that. No, I appreciate it. So you had two things there. One, I want to go back to your first point where you talked about the powers that be don't like our feelings being loud. That's one of the principles of community organizing is getting people to talk about, if when you have one-to-ones or in group meetings, when you start talking about what your fears and hopes are, and you start finding out that more people have the same experiences, just like we've seen, the more things get shared, the more people say, oh, wait, that's me too. Right. The Me Too movement. Right. So the more things people begin talking about their pain, the more afraid the powers that be become. So, and maybe there's something also to the climate grief. The more climate grief we're willing to express, the more those who are in power will begin to be afraid of people's grief. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, Rob.
Actually, I think Paula was up next, but she dropped off for a moment.
Yeah, my
ahead,
computer's coming and going. To begin with, Tony, I am offended by Black Little Mermaid. In the original story, she was green. They should have stuck to green. She was also about 2 inches tall because she rode seahorses. So, if you can't stick to the facts, just
the source material, the facts.
So are we going to see the realistic Little Mermaid that is like a manatee, and it's the story of love between a man and his manatee?
We live in a society that wants us to cut our losses and move on. I have so many times when there's been a death, I have heard people talk about they're just not moving on. They need to get over it. And there is no time limit on grief. And to begin with, I don't think you can move on until you take time to focus on what you have lost, like David did. I think you have to look at all the ways your life is changing and will never be the same again before you can move on. I think it's the same thing with forgiving someone. You can't forgive someone until you've looked at exactly how they've hurt you and have been very honest about what it's done to you, and then you can let it go. So, I think the church needs to learn to encourage lament more than I have ever seen it done before.
Thank you for that. Yeah. Okay, Rob.
So, I want to think carefully about lament as a moral act. Okay, I think it's certainly true and important that when our lamentation has run its course, there is inspiration and motivation for action, and that there's a response to the lament to say, oh, we've got to go, work for justice, and God works through us, right? But I think it's really important to recognize the significance of the lament itself as a moral act independently of any such outcome, right? I think it's very American, frankly, to focus on lament as a kind of step before we pull ourselves up by our emotional bootstraps and go, take out after the man. Like the lament itself, right? I mean, because you've talked about this, Dave, like the need to articulate a narrative about what the church is supposed to be doing right now, what Christianity is about, when we see that historically so much has perpetuated intergenerational trauma and manufactured suffering and white supremacy and on and on and on. Like, what are we supposed to be doing? I think, it's really important that, like in the Beatitudes, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Not blessed are those who mourn, for they shall, get their own back and show everybody how it's done because they're going to get motivated and go out and march and change the world. No, they're going to be comforted, right? So, like, let the lament stand as a morally significant act that is about narrative. We're saying these horrible things have been done and these horrible things are still being done. That's the narrative we're in. The need to say what that narrative is distinct from the set of actions we then take in response to that narrative. So, I mean, I love the grim Psalms. I love Lamentations. I love, and so I really like calling it self-pity. Again, I think is a very American trap, right? If all you're doing is inhabiting those emotions, that's not self-pity. Right. Self-pity sort of assumes that we've gotten to the point where action is possible. And yeah, you do get to that point. But I really think it's important that we acknowledge the full scope of the space that lament can occupy and how hard it can be to work through emotions and live with them and scrutinize them to get to the point that action is an appropriate response, right? That you may have a lot of narrative to get through before that happens. Some people maybe don't even get through the narrative. Maybe the job of some people is lament, right? People make art, and then other people are inspired by that art and then say, here's what that art is moving me to do. And our whole system responds to those injustices because people made art and voiced lament, and that was what they had it in them to do.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Yeah. Go ahead, Tony.
But Rob, let's unpack why. Like people, like it's almost as if modern Christians are afraid of the whole act of lamentations. And why? Because we have not taught people how to exercise their faith. Like you see this all the time, especially like in church settings when people die. Like Shelby's talked about it several times about the death of her husband. Like people tell you all this unrealistic stuff. Oh, it's gonna get better. Oh, God doesn't make a mistake. Oh, this was all his plan. He's like, oh, shut up, please. Just shut up. Like the church is afraid to be uncomfortable. So, and sometimes when things like that happen, you have to sit in your discomfort. Because if you don't sit in that discomfort, then it's impossible for you to grow. So you glance over everything with these like platitudes and like tinkling brass messages without really exploring and understanding what has happened in this moment. You know, and people do that all the time. And it's really sickening for me for the church because like if we're the ones who are like holding up the bloodstained banner, like we're the ones trying to show people how Jesus would have done it, and we don't know how to do it because we haven't really learned. We just know these things, I should say, almost like a Pavlovian dog response to, oh, somebody died, God's gonna make it better. Somebody died, oh, God don't make much. Stop, just stop doing that. If you don't know what to say, shut up. Give someone your shoulder, let them cry. But for God's sakes, we need to really start telling people to move on and get over it if they have not really like explored what caused these feelings and what has happened so that you can move on without manufacturing your own sense of grief.
Yeah. I appreciate that. I think you're both touching on like that idea that I mentioned the illustration of the bystanders and how oftentimes we're trying to soothe the bystanders rather than the person who's been affected. You shouldn't move so quickly to soothing the bystanders, to trying to use platitudes or theological truisms to make it all okay. I want to be sure. So, Megan, I know you and Paula have your hands up. I want to be sure that we get to some of the comments in the chat.
Yeah, I was going to bring up some Facebook comments.
Okay,
thank you. I have my hands on. So,
thank you. Let's do that.
Okay. So let's see. Well, Catherine Cooper says, please address people who, like me, tend to be in a constant state of lamentation. I carry my own lament and everyone else's too.
Yeah, I do want to actually pause there. I think that's a good, I think some of us take on other people's grief, and there's some of us take on other people's laments, and I think that can be both healthy or unhealthy. I mean, some of that's where's our boundaries, to make sure that like that person's grief is, I can feel it. I've got mirror neurons in my brain that say, hey, this person's in tears, I'm gonna cry. When I see someone else suffer, I feel it. I actually have part of my brain devoted to that. And that's empathy, and that's a good thing. But I do think part of it is kind of where are we, how does this affecting us? And if I feel like I'm in a constant state of lament, am I paying attention to all the things that are around me, or since my brain has a negative bias, am I only looking at the things that are awful in the world, right? Our brains, to keep us alive, look for problems. So if I'm constantly looking at the negative of life, that can be self-reinforcing. And so part of it is, if I feel like I'm carrying other people's laments all the time, that's a time for some counseling, because we can't carry everybody's laments and ours too. That's got to be a community shared thing. So I appreciate you bringing that up. Let's do some other comments and we'll come back to the panel.
Victoria says, I don't believe this is bitterness. I believe this is necessary rage that is coming from an assertive place and a place of unity against the hypocrisy. She also says, Tony, interesting, the comment about lamenting on the loss of rose-colored glasses, but I actually think it's a tremendous privilege to lose those glasses and see the truth. Yeah. And then David Barnhart says, Tony's earlier comment about having someone to talk to about lament, anger, etc., can provide therapeutic benefits and reinforces going to therapy is spot on. It's also a way to decide how to move on.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that.
There are a couple comments in the chat too.
Yeah, you mind reading those?
Yeah. So I don't know if this one got read or not. It was from Kyle. It said, species loss. It never fails to astound me how folk who believe Noah literally saved the Earth's present species in the ark are those who care least about another species going extinct.
So accurate.
Can't say number amen or ouch on that one.
Yeah.
And then I don't see.
There's actually a little higher up.
Yeah.
It starts a little higher up, Tony.
Can you? Okay, I had logged.
He got off.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Teresa
says, and Camille had good ones there.
Yeah. Teresa says, anger is an appropriate step on the path to healing. Sometimes you need to deal with and process your bitter resentment for a while. We probably need to stop trying to control what we should feel, because when you try to control emotions instead of processing them, you can lock them in.
Mm-hmm.
Same as with grief and lament.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Do the first part of Kyle's.
Camille, or maybe it's, I don't know. Camille says, this idea of looking at people's trauma as being at the root of their hate and anger kind of reflects on how the Christian church has allowed the trauma to simmer and fester by not encouraging lamentation. Instead, saying that all anyone has to do is be reborn and take Christ as their savior, and all their troubles will be wiped away. It denies the need to be vulnerable in the eyes of the world, because you're supposed to be strong if you are a Christian. Feelings can't get in the way of that sense of power and of being saved.
Thank you for that. I think that's an important acknowledgement. If your focus is all on conversion, and if Jesus, everything's going to be better, then lamentation pushes back against that, right? I think that's a good observation. Thank you. Yeah.
Teresa also said, let me amend what I said above. I don't mean anything as consecutive steps as a process, because anger or grief or really emotion comes in waves, and did not mean to imply you can process and be done. Yeah,
Amen.
Totally.
Amen.
Yeah.
I want to bring us something. So Catherine talked about taking on pretty much the troubles of other people, and I've interacted with her on here, but Catherine has a lot of empathy, and the one thing that you have to be careful of is letting other people co-opt your empathy, i.e. your energy. And the other thing, there's a term that someone said, and I realized it applies to my boyfriend, is I think she also has an unhealthy level of empathy. I think sometimes people can have too much empathy. When you put others above yourself all the time, that can be harmful to you. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons why I initially even got into therapy, one was because I was mourning the loss of my best friend, that I didn't get to complete my grief process because of my cancer surgery. But then I kind of had to think about why I was doing all this helping of people. Like, there was just one weekend, I probably drove 1,000 miles in one weekend doing things for people between Georgia and Alabama. And part of it is a natural need for me. I am a helper. Like, I want to help people. And I had to realize or find out, was my level of empathy unhealthy? Like, was I helping people at my expense? Because that's what you don't do. You cannot help other people at your expense, because it's kind of like when the plane is crashing, they tell you to put your mask on first. But like, you have to take care of yourself, and being empathetic for other people causes you not to take care of yourself. You need to find a way to pull back from that, because at that point you're playing a martyr instead of a hero. And we all want to be the hero because we want to live. Martyrs die. We want that to happen at its appropriate time. We don't want to hasten that coming. But you have to figure out, at what point does this become untenable? Because I can't think of anybody who likes to help people more than I do. Like, I literally, even people I don't like, I just want to help them, but you have to figure out what the call out point is. And then Megan, you read a comment that somebody else has said, but I have a question because I'm still trying to figure out what do these conservatives think that they've lost? Like, I don't even think this argument even applies to them because they haven't lost anything. Yeah, you lost your slaves, you lost your separate water fountains, you lost the ability to just kill a black person and nothing happens to you. Like, those
Sometimes.
Haven't really lost that one.
Well, yeah, I mean, sometimes, it depends on whether or not there's cameras there. But we're trying to make laws to get rid of the cameras, 6 feet. But like, what have they lost other than the ability to oppress people? And why would you be mad about that?
Yeah. I don't have an answer for that.
Teresa said they lost the Little Mermaid. Yeah, that'll do it.
Oh, gosh.
Burn the country down.
Oh, no. Well, so I do want to say, I think, as I said, I think there isn't actually a lament going on. I mean, I think if you listen to speeches and you listen to people like, some of the figureheads, there's a lot of ginning up of rage. And I mean, that's one reason it's aggrieved white supremacy. It's like, someone has taken away my privileged place, and no one will actually name that, right? Like, so the lament isn't happening. It's not saying these are the specific concrete things that we've lost. And I really feel like in lament, that's what's called out. Like, I am naming the good that has been taken away, or I'm naming the good that is being lost. Like, I can lament species, I can lament individuals. I don't think you can maybe you can lament your privilege. I don't think that's, people aren't naming that, right? They're not naming the specific goods that have been lost, because to do so would reveal too much about them. Paula, you've had your hand up a while.
Under the category, the wisdom of children. Back in my Baptist days, my mother died. And my daughter Lauren was 11 years old at the time. And we did that very Southern thing of visitation the night before the funeral. And Mama was real active in a large Baptist church. So there was a huge crowd there. And I was busy up by the coffin, shaking hands with my sister. And I looked over and saw my 11-year-old daughter, Lauren, in a corner. And her school counselor, who also went to church with us, was right up in her face, just talking real animated. And I already knew her counselor was somewhat crazy. But after we left the funeral home, got in the car, I said, "What was Miss Becky doing, talking to you for so long?" And Lauren just rolled her eyes and said, and Lauren called my mother Mama Sis. She said, "Miss Becky said Mama Sis was happier now, that she was in a better place, and that she wouldn't even want to come back alive here again, and that she was an angel now, and she was going to follow me everywhere I went, right behind my shoulder, and make sure bad things never happened to me." And then she looked at me and she said, "I knew she didn't know what she was talking about, but I just felt like she needed somebody to talk to."
Oh man.
So Lauren was wise enough not to even waste her breath telling the lady she didn't know what she was talking about. She just got away as quick as she could.
But think about all of the faithless things she told her. Like, all nothing that she said came from a place of faith. Like, it was all faithless that she told her, and she was smart enough to realize this is bullcrap.
Wow. Man, and she's there with the counselor, and she's taking the role of counselor. Okay, yeah, that's interesting. It's interesting that you feel that way. Yeah, Rob.
I think so. If one has the blinders on, right, I think it's possible to the angry traditionalist conservatives believe that they are lamenting something, right? And you could even say that the whole "Make America Great Again" is kind of their response to that lament, right? So I think it's important to think about where the content of lament comes from, you know, like so here's the image that came to me, right? You know, if somebody comes running in and they're angry and they start playing on your fear, you know, they can convince you very quickly that, like, oh my gosh, everything is on fire and we have to do this like right now, right? And so this, I mean, I want to read again what I put in the chat in response to what Tony was saying earlier, right? The importance of lament, of doing it and leaving space for it, is to create the foundation for a proper response to it. Trying to shortcut grief and just move on to action is what truncates our proper responses and perpetuates suffering. Right? I think that's true. That's why I said it.
Yeah.
Because, you know, like, so, you know, sort of in response to Catherine, right? I think Tony is right that, like, the way we work on our healthy boundaries to make sure that we're not martyring ourselves and treating ourselves like in Kantian ethics, right? You know, Immanuel Kant says you have to treat people as ends in themselves and not as means to an end. And excessively empathetic people, I think I'll say we have a tendency to treat ourselves as means, right? On behalf of other people's ends. And so those healthy boundaries are really important to recognize that we are also an end in ourselves, that we have value, regardless of what we do, right? But at the same time, being hugely empathetic also creates this enormous capacity for lament that can have moral significance, right? So I don't think it's about trying to turn that off. It's about trying to understand what to do with it. And so my thought is that, you know, again, going back to that idea of figuring out the narrative or helping steward a narrative, promulgate a narrative, right, for the community, by naming the things and saying, look, this is happening and this matters and it's sad, right? It's wrong. You know, that it's kind of a process of helping us figure out what movie we're in, right? To go back to that, as I've used many times. I think the people who want to very quickly rush in angry and exploit your fear or your sadness and tell you what movie you're in, right? Which just happens to make them powerful. Yeah, that's the thing that we need thorough lament to work against, right? Yeah. To tell us what movie we're really in, to help us figure out what the movie is and what the right response is, instead of this shortcut response that is based on just fear, just anger, just a desire for power.
Yeah, and I think kind of what you're pointing at is lament in many ways is truth telling. I mean, you're telling the truth about your feelings, about the situation. I think that's I appreciate that. So yeah, Tony, I see your hand.
In the chat. No,
yeah,
it's
go ahead.
Going down in the chat.
Go for it. It's
going down in the chat. So this is from Camille. Oh my God. They are losing their rights to be religiously superior. Their privilege rides on their feelings, and that only they have the ability to tell others what to do and how to live properly. The less that narrative holds water, the more they fear for their immortal souls. And that is some truth telling right there. Like, really, that's what it is. The deal, Teresa comes around with the slam and dunk. She says, you know what? I do think you can and probably need to lament or at least process the loss of privilege. And that includes whatever emotions comes up, but also framing them in a way where we actually understand someone else's perspective. As a society, we're going to need to give up our lives of greed to survive as a species. Stories of the amazing opulent society some people lived before the waters rose are going to be legendary if we don't process it. It will be Camelot or the antebellum South type of legendary wealth in a time of great luxury rather than a cautionary tale from history. If we don't focus on what we created and how we got here and how what our privileges are actually signs of inequality and our own unwillingness to share power, resources, or whatever, we won't get where we need to go. And now that right there.
That's a word.
That right there. Thank you, Teresa. You always put it out there.
That is a great note to end on. And I think that's really powerful. Yeah, absolutely.
Nothing else to be said.
Gone with the Wind is a lament, right? Oof.
Yeah. Instead of the cautionary tale.
Yeah.
Wow.
All right. Well, I'm gonna pull our on that note, I'm gonna pull up our
pass the plate.
I know, right? Pass the plate. Let me put up the link for donations. All right. If y'all would close this out.
All right. Who can tell what a day might bring? Therefore, gracious God, cause me to live every day as if it were my last. And for I know not, but that it may be such, cause me to live now as I shall wish I had done when I come to die. Amen.
God is love. Nothing is wasted. All things shall be well. Go in peace.
So thank you all for being with me today. Again, if you've been watching on Facebook or YouTube, if you would comment with where you're watching from or click like, just so we have a way to count your attendance with us today. I'm going to stop the stream. And those of you on Zoom, if you'd stick around for just a minute more. Oh, let me do a quick announcement. I am at 3 o'clock going to be doing some nature and forest therapy at the Eastern Trailhead at Ruffner Mountain. So if anyone would like to come and be in nature and appreciate the wonder of creation, love to have you join me. So that's 3 o'clock at Ruffner Mountain Eastern Trailhead. So bye to those of you on the stream, those of you on Zoom.